Hey, it's Darius. Did you fail the CPA FAR exam? Scores are out, and if you still need to pass FAR, there's probably some topics like cash to accrual that you need a better understanding of. And I want you to note that cash to accrual is not just one topic, because there's cash to accrual revenue questions, cash to accrual expense questions, and then the harder questions are the cash to accrual net income ones. Now, I75ers do very well on cash to accrual because we learn the basics. We don't try to memorize it. And the most basic of the three is cash to accrual revenue. So let's start with that. So maybe you got a question like this on the exam and you didn't know what to do. How much revenue is earned this year if cash collections are $100,000 and beginning accounts receivable is $3,000 and ending accounts receivable is $10,000? How much revenue is earned this year? And the answer is $107,000. Why? Because the exam's asking for earned revenue this year, and they're starting you with cash collected this year of $100,000. Well, the ending AR of $10,000, that was earned this year. Won't be collected until next year. So add $10,000 because it was earned this year, although it wasn't counted in the $100,000 since it was not collected this year. The beginning AR of $3,000, that was earned last year. Collected this year, but earned last year. So subtract the $3,000 so it's not counted as earned both last year and this year. So the $3,000 is last year's earnings subtracted from the $100,000 because it's already included in the 100, and if you don't subtract it, you're going to be double counting it. So the earned revenue is $100,000 collected plus the $10,000 ending receivable, which is this year's revenue, minus the $3,000 beginning receivable, which was last year's revenue, and that's $107,000. So the question asks for how much revenue is earned this year, and the answer is $107,000, letter B. Note that when receivables increase, like they did from $3,000 at the beginning of the year to $10,000 at the end, it means that more revenue was earned this year than cash collected. $107,000 earned compared to $100,000 collected. Receivables go up, it means we earned more than we collected. Okay, Darius, what about when receivables go down? That's what we'll see here. How much revenue is earned this year if cash collections are $100,000 and beginning AR is $5,000, ending receivable is $1,000. Notice receivables are going down from $5,000 to $1,000. So once again, a cash to accrual revenue question. The exam is asking for earned revenue this year, and they're starting us with cash collected this year, $100,000. Well, the ending AR of $1,000, that was earned this year, collected next year. So add the $1,000 because it was earned this year, although it wasn't counted in the $100,000 since it was not collected yet. So add ending AR of $1,000. Beginning AR of $5,000, that was earned last year, collected this year, but subtract the $5,000. Why? So it's not counted as earned revenue both last year and this year. It's last year's revenue. If you don't subtract the $5,000, it's going to be double counted. So for this year's earned revenue, start with this year's cash collected, then add the ending AR of $1,000. Why? Because it was earned this year, collected next year. Subtract the beginning AR of $5,000. Why? Because it was earned last year, collected this year. So what was earned this year? $96,000, and that's choice C. Notice that when receivables decrease like they did here from $5,000 down to $1,000, it means that more cash was collected this year, $100,000, compared to revenue earned, $96,000. So we said that there's three different types of cash to accrual questions that the CPA FAR exam is going to expect you to know. And we just looked at cash to accrual revenue. Now let's look at cash to accrual expenses. Here they want to know how much interest expense has been incurred for the year if interest paid was $120,000, beginning interest payable was $10,000, and ending interest payable $16,000. And the answer is A, $126,000. The question is asking for accrual basis expense. We start with what they give us, which is cash basis expense. $120,000 was paid this year for interest. Ending interest payable, they tell us that's a total of $16,000. What does ending interest payable represent? It's this year's expense paid next year. So that $16,000 is incurred this year but paid next year. So we're going to add that $16,000 because we want to know the total expense incurred for interest this year. So when we add the 16,000, we're up to 136,000 of accrual basis interest expense. But we're not done, because beginning interest payable is also given to us, and beginning interest payable is last year's expense, paid this year. So subtract the 10,000 of beginning interest payable, since the 10,000 is already in the 120,000, since 120,000 represents what was paid this year. But the 10,000 needs to be subtracted so that it's not double counted as expense both this year and last year. Right? That 10,000 is last year's expense. If you don't subtract it from the 120,000, it's going to be counted as this year's expense also. So we're left with 120,000 paid this year, plus 16,000, which is the ending payable, incurred this year, paid next year, minus 10,000, the beginning interest payable, paid this year, incurred last year. And that's 126,000 of accrual basis interest expense. 126,000 represents the amount of expense for interest incurred this year. And that's what the question wants to know. How much interest expense has been incurred for the year if interest paid was 120,000, beginning interest payable 10,000, ending interest payable 16,000. Note that when the payable increases from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, more expense is incurred, 126,000, compared to cash paid, 120,000. What about when the payable decreases? The exam could ask it this way. How much interest expense has been incurred for the year if interest paid was 120,000, beginning interest payable was 9,000, and ending interest payable 2,000? So which way did the payable go for the year? Decreased. And the answer is D, 113,000. The question is asking again for accrual basis interest expense. We start with cash basis interest expense, which is 120,000. That's the amount paid this year for interest. Then we add 2,000, the ending interest payable balance. Why? Because it was incurred this year, paid next year. And then we subtract 9,000, the beginning interest payable. Why? Because it was paid this year, but it was incurred last year. And the amount of expense incurred for interest this year is 113,000. Note that the payable decreased from the beginning of the year to the end. The payable went from 9,000 down to 2,000, and as a result, more cash was paid for interest this year, 120,000, compared to the interest expense incurred, 113,000. So when you see questions on cash to accrual expenses, this is how I want you to approach it. Ask yourself, what year was it incurred and what year was it paid? Don't try to memorize, and no fancy diagrams are needed. This is all analysis, which the CPA FAR exam loves to test you on. Now we'll take it one step further and look at cash to accrual net income. We know that revenue and net income have a direct relationship. And we should also know that expenses and net income have an inverse relationship. I want you to keep that in mind as we go to cash to accrual net income. All right, are you ready for cash to accrual net income? Watch where it starts. If cash basis net income is 100,000, what do they want to know? How much is accrual basis net income? Well, it tells us that accounts receivable began the year at 5,000 and ended the year at 9,000, and the answer is B, 104,000. Why? Well, the question is asking for accrual basis net income, which is revenue minus expense. We start with cash basis net income, that's what they give us, and that's cash collected minus cash paid. So if cash basis net income is 100,000 and they tell us ending receivables are 9,000, ending receivables represent what? Revenue that was earned this year, collected next year. So what do you do with that 9,000? Add it. Because we've just earned 9,000 more this year than we've collected. And revenue and net income have a direct relationship. So we'll add the 9,000 to what was already collected. We're at 109. But we're not done, because beginning receivables represent what was earned revenue last year, collected this year. So subtract 5,000, so it's not counted as earned revenue both this year and last year. It was already counted last year. Subtract the 5,000 beginning receivable because it's not this year's revenue. It's only this year's cash collection. And we're at 104,000. So when receivables increase like they did here, from 5,000 to 9,000, that means we earned more revenue this year, 104,000, compared to cash collected this year, 100,000. and we earned $4,000 more in revenue than we collected in cash. But the question asks about accrual basis net income. But we know that revenue has a direct relationship with net income. Therefore, if we earn $4,000 more in revenue than we collected, then accrual basis net income has to be $4,000 higher than cash basis net income. So this question wanted to know how much is accrual basis net income if cash basis net income is $100,000, and the answer is $104,000, letter B. And that's because when receivables go up, it means that we earned more in revenue than we collected in cash. And revenue and net income have a direct relationship. So if we earn $4,000 more than we collected, then net income is $4,000 more on the accrual basis than it is on the cash basis. All right, let's try this. How much is accrual basis net income if cash basis net income is $100,000 and beginning interest payable was $9,000 and ending interest payable is $2,000? So this is a cash to accrual net income question also, but it's not as straightforward as the last one. Why? Because it involves expenses and payables. Remember that expenses and net income have an inverse relationship. So expenses up, net income down. And if you think you know, leave me the answer in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this video and need more help with the CPA FAR exam, go to i75cpareview.com and get yourself on I-75 with me, Darius Clark, because the right teacher makes all the difference.